Hello everyone, welcome to Continental Aspire Soccer TV. Here we are for another episode, and we are with Mr. John McCluskey, who actually has worked with brands and pioneered brands such as Reebok in the UK, working as a top sports marketing executive. So we're just, John, glad to have you on the show today.
Likewise, Nick, thank you. I hate to send the good weather report here, but it's about 80 degrees and sunny. I don't imagine that it's as warm there and raining, but warm weather and good wishes from Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
Oh, there you go, enjoying the East Coast there, you know what I mean? Was really looking forward to this one because I know that the conversation I've had with you, and I know a lot of the stories and stuff, and I think like our audience is just really going to enjoy. But also learning, I think, on like a lot of levels, you know. And I know you've got a really interesting story. You've obviously been around the professional game for a good 30 years.
30 years. Yeah. Quite time flies. My hair's a different color, but at least I still have my hair, so I'm happy about that.
There you go. So John, just wanted to obviously start up. Just give us a breakdown who you were in high school and who you were as a person. A bit of your kind of family background. Just take us from there.
Sure, Nick. First off, I'm deliberately going to use the word soccer, and that hopefully won't offend because there's probably only 3 countries in the world that call it soccer, and mine is one. And I think it's important to call it soccer because most believe around the world that the United States doesn't have a football culture, whereas we do, and that's a whole other podcast. But I'm going to use the term soccer, not out of naivety. It's on purpose. So first, Nick, my dad, who's a Scottish immigrant, was a great influence in me having an interest in soccer. He came here in the late 50s. And as many immigrants came directly to New York, and many of them still would teletext home or make a phone call home to watch what Celtic was doing on the weekend or Manchester United. And soon after, many of these clubs would come play at the New York Polo Grounds, and there was no stadium there. And sometimes there would be up to 50,000 people on their shoulders coming to see their favorite team play. And my father told me those stories even before I kicked the ball. So there's also a town right outside of Manhattan called Kearny, New Jersey, which is very Scot ethnocentric. And probably every Saturday, my dad would drive down there almost an hour and a half to pick up his black pudding. You know, we hated it, but he loved it. And that was his cultural tie to Scotland. And when he was there, he would pick up the newspapers from the week before, and he would get all the scores, and he would lay them out in front of me. And I was just fascinated to hear about some of these legends that I never had seen or never met. Jimmy Johnston being one. So shortly after there, I would go and visit my grandparents outside of Glasgow. And, I got to go to a match, my first match, when they were all standing. And in those days, instead of going to the bathroom, they would do it right in the stands there, and they were drunk and singing songs, and it was just a wonderful experience at probably 10 or 11 years old. And from there, I just loved the sport. And at that time, back where I lived, there was no youth soccer, there was no organized soccer, so a bunch of us, like anywhere else in the world, would go down to the local park and play pickup games. And I think that's where we started getting good. You could see who was quite clever and who wasn't. And years later, my dad helped to start a youth organization there. And sometimes we had to travel 4 or 5 hours to find another team because no one had organized soccer here in the United States, unless you went up to an area where, like Ludlow, Massachusetts, where it was all Portuguese. They were very professionally run and had been playing the sport for 50 plus years. So I was immersed in the sport at a very young age with a British influence. We also had a television program that came on in the 70s called Soccer Made in Germany. There was a British commentator, Toby Charles, who was absolutely fascinating and funny. The game was edited for an hour, and you couldn't tell the editing was so smooth. And Kevin Keegan was at Hamburg, and I just remember great players of that era and being so excited to see it. It was my way of seeing my heroes, like many see basketball and baseball players. I knew about Kevin Keegan when no one else in my neighborhood did. So from there, we played, and in high school, we had quite a good team. We went on and won the state championship, and we got some notoriety that way. I then went to a small school in upstate New York, which was a Division I soccer powerhouse. We only had 1,500 people, but beat the likes of UCLA and UConn. And those days, college soccer was really the only game in town because the NASL, of note, the New York Cosmos, had folded. So there really wasn't much for one to aspire to unless you wanted to go to Europe, and that was pretty much of an impossible dream for an American.
That's interesting. So in terms of, a lot of the millennials of today, when they see they can go the college route, but a lot more American kids are coming to Europe in today's kind of day and age, the likes of Christian Pulisic, he would have found it very hard. Carry on what you were saying.
I would say culturally in the United States, it's very difficult when you identify talent at a young age to make the recommendation, we think you need to go to Europe. And the reason is because a college education is so important here. Christian Pulisic is probably one of a few, the best known example of a young boy whose parents understood it, sent him at a very young age, and we know the rest of the story. We have a very poor youth development program here. And I think, we play soccer for 4 to 5 months, and then you take off the soccer hat and it goes to baseball, basketball, whereas that same age child is playing soccer all year round. And that's a big problem we have here in development. The boys are as strong as Europeans, sometimes stronger than South Americans, but it's the soccer intelligence that they're lacking. They can compete physically, but in terms of 1 and 2 touch and playing the ball from the back, this is what we lack, is a technical ability.
In terms of looking at, I suppose the whole university direction and obviously competing against those teams. So I mean, when a lot of the teams were coming, I know you were talking about when they used to come, because I remember when Belfast Celtic were disbanded, they used to come over and they did a final tour, and then they were no more pretty much after that due to the troubles. Pretty much at that time, with their crosstown rivals, Linfield.
I think that there was a golden age where great teams would come over, but unless you were connected to an ethnic community, you didn't realize it. I mean, we have this company, a Relevant Sports now, that brings over some of the big name clubs, and they play each other. It really doesn't mean anything, and they're charging $150 a ticket, but it's a friendly game, and that's done well. Certainly, the pandemics hurt that. It stopped, but going back for the last 50 years, Porto or Benfica will come to different parts of Massachusetts because there's a large population, and certainly out on the West Coast, the Mexican teams, they come up, they love to go shopping, bring things back for their wives, get away. And there's 50, 60, 75, even 100,000 people at the Rose Bowl watching Club America play, maybe Chivas Guadalajara. It's a gold mine here, but nobody has really captured it yet. And that's right. The million-dollar question, how do you do that?
Yeah, I think because obviously I know Bundesliga, they have, obviously they've got offices in New York and stuff, and what they're trying to do, and it hasn't really quite, you know what I mean? I suppose it is happening, but it's not happening at the pace.
Well, no, you've hit the mark. I think that as Americans are naive about the culture of European soccer, football, the Europeans are naive about the culture here. Yes, they all have offices, but in my discussions with a lot of these commercial directors, they don't understand the full aspect. It's usually about the money first, unfortunately. Can they sell the next sponsor? But for me, I think when you come here, you have to drop the anchor, lay the anchor here.
Yeah.
Why a big club is not affiliated with some of the youth clubs that we have is beyond me. They come here, they do watch parties, they'll gather a bunch of fans in a park and they'll give out some freebies and so forth, and they play a match, and then they're gone. Well, that's a cotton candy high to me. A lot of European, particularly the French and the Belgians, they go and mine their talent in Africa. It's a bit hard there. You don't know what you're getting. But here we have tremendous facilities. It's easy access. It's safe. We don't have, per se, political conflicts, if you want. Some may argue in the last few weeks it's a little different. But, we have very well organized clubs here. The problem is that we don't have good identification, nor do we have coaching staff that are on par with what the Europeans demand. And part of that is there's a selfish attitude here, Nick. I'm sure when you grew up in Northern Ireland, you went down to the local park. No one ever asked you to pay to play. That's the evil word here, is paid to play. I think some of your listeners will be absolutely befuddled to understand that parents are paying up to $3,500. I've heard up to $5,000 to play organized youth soccer. They call it travel soccer, and supposedly the label is you're getting the best coaching available. And not all of them are bad, but I would venture it would be pretty hard for anyone where you grew up to understand paying $3,500 to play organized soccer or disorganized soccer, And in some regards, I've heard that some of the big clubs are going back from having a regimented system until they reach a certain age. Whereas, let them play, guide them a little bit, but let them make mistakes, give them confidence, and then you pick out the strongest on the field. And the other thing we have here is the coaches are not willing to let a 10-year-old play up a category because they're worried, well, I'm going to ruin my record. My best player leaves, then it's all about keeping my job and having my best player on my team score as many goals as they can, rather than saying, look, this young lad can play, let's see him at under 12 and maybe at under 14. And like when you grew up in Northern Ireland, you went down to the park to play. And at 12 years old, if you were strong enough physically to play with 17-year-olds, they'd let you get a game. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you were, I would say usually, I don't know. It was interesting. I mean, I always played within 2 to 3 years, typically. That's typically how it worked. But I know that there's other places where I think if somebody's maybe 4 years is the most I've seen, possibly 5. I think I've never seen any more than that.
Sure. I mean, one has to worry about a youngster getting hurt, playing, a 12-year-old with a 20-year-old. That's a big age difference. But reality is that there is no policeman in Brazil saying you can't play at the park. And I'm a firm believer of this. I have a lot of Brazilian friends and coaches and players, and I ask them. And basically, they learn on the street. And, African players are highly desired. And, I don't want to sound like I'm prejudiced in saying this, but not every African is poor. But if you look at the history of the game, a lot of players came from poor backgrounds where they didn't even have shoes, or they might not even had a ball. They had I know it sounds cliche, but a lot of them had a rolled up cloth, or it didn't matter. Whereas American kids, I feel, are entitled and they're spoiled. They play on perfectly manicured lawns. They all want the latest $200, $300 boot from Adidas. And then when the season's over, that's it. None of them are willing to put in the time to do it on a daily basis. And I say to them, you're 17 years old right now. You just finished your season. While you finished your season, over at Academy in France right now, a young African boy who's brought over is looking at changing his life and his family's life. And every day he's going to concentrate on his football and learn his studies as well. But he understands what it's to be, how lucky and how fortunate he is to be there. And by the way, French Academy is a good look that in maybe 5 to 7 years you could be playing in the EPL or the Championship and make a good living.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, tell me this, John. So obviously, when we kind of go in, and obviously we looked at kind of like the state. So the state of U.S. soccer, we're definitely going to hit on that. So you obviously, once you finish school and all those things, and then you head off you go to Hartwick College.
Hartwick, small school in upstate New York. I designed this major. It was sports marketing. You had to take certain courses, and you did an internship. I worked with a professional indoor organization, soccer. That was amazing because it was something new. I don't think any other country in the world besides the U.S. played indoor soccer, futsal, but this was a combination of soccer and hockey, on a hockey rink. And at a very young age, I had a lot of responsibility to help market the sport in Denver, Colorado. And here I am, not even finished school yet, and I had to come up with ways of getting people to come downtown in the middle of the winter to come buy a ticket to watch indoor soccer. And one of the things that I'm very proud of and glad that I did was I said, look, we have to make this agreeable for women to come. And I've always said this to people overseas. In South America, getting a club to listen about the female fan or player was it was like hitting a wall. But I was so happy to see, I think it was last season before the pandemic happened, Arsenal had a match with their ladies with 30,000 people. 10 years ago, that was unheard of. But 10 years ago, if you went to a U.S. women's national game, you'd get 20 or 30,000 people because we are the world champions, or at least in the top 5 of the world. But it's nice to see now Brazil has a team. England, watching the England women, they were amazing. They had incredible talent. And from a commercial standpoint, you're a fool. You're a fool if you don't look at the female fan. Right. She's going to buy a scarf. She's going to buy a jersey. Now all of a sudden your merchandise is doubled. I remember one time when Reebok first got into the NFL, one of the smart things that they did was they made a jersey that was contoured to a female's body. Women want to look good. So do men. I don't want to sound sexist. But now, instead of having a baggy men's jersey that hanging off them, Reebok designed, and the sales went through the roof. Just a simple thing like that. Sometimes we need women running things because they do things, they run our households, they run the family, and they do things pretty good. So, yes, women's soccer, I'm a big proponent of. You asked, what I did after school. I wrote a note to someone that I read in a trade magazine that was obtaining the World Cup marketing rights, and that was called ISL Marketing, and they were owned by the Dassler family, who founded Adidas, and joint partnership with FIFA. And it just so happened that the gentleman who was hired to run the organization was going to be in New York. And this was a letter, Nick, in these days. It wasn't even a fax. It was a letter. And he said, I'm going to be in New York. I'll call you and arrange. And we met in New York City. And he said, we'd love to have you as one of our junior partners. And, 4 weeks later, I was in Lucerne, Switzerland. And for me, that was the starting for the rest of my career, because I had such good access to many influential people. One being Sepp Blatter, before he was president of FIFA. I had met Yao Havilange on many occasions as a junior partner at this company. But I did a project which is quite comical. I don't know if you want to hear it now, with Sepp Blatter, that you'd laugh in hysterics. But that relationship with Sepp Blatter came in to be quite helpful in my business, 5 to 10 years later, because I had a personal relationship with him. And I'm sure, in what you do, it's all about the people do they trust you? And it served me well through the years.
Obviously, it's a very different landscape now, as we'll discuss in this episode. Well, your journey, obviously, so once you had left, you were obviously gaining good experience. So the internship that you gained, it gave you an insight into what it was actually going to be like, you know. And also the world was different then, wasn't it? Because 1970s, 1980s, there was, you know what I mean, things weren't established yet like today. Because everything's so accessible. It's always where you're flooded, where they're literally flooded with opportunity, but also at the same time, it's more competitive. Because
Absolutely.
would you agree with that? If you're coming in as a sports marketing executive, you're definitely going to face loads of competition.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I think that there's two types of people. There's two people who want to and need to and have to work in a tech-backed type of corporation, and then there's people who want something that they really have a passion for. You don't necessarily need to use your mind in the way you think I mean it, but who wouldn't want to work in sports,
Right.
and especially in a global sport to possibly meet Ronaldo, you know, or Messi or Ryan Giggs, and that's a thrill. That's the benefit. Sometimes working in sports aren't the highest paying jobs, but now they're pretty hard to come by. And if there is anyone young listening or someone who wants to make a career transition, it's just get involved, do something that you enjoy, you know, volunteer. You know, I played for a semi-professional club outside of Manhattan that was, it's probably 100 years old now. And at the time was, you know, 75 years old. And, you know, I helped out, and it gave me great pleasure to be able to pass the torch and to learn from people who'd been there for a while. And at the same time, to bring people in. I'm a big believer in mentoring. I had a gentleman who just passed away who introduced me to some very influential people in the soccer world. And it helped my career greatly. And I think people who are in this business need to bring the young ones in. It seems like everybody always wants to protect their turf, and I don't know why. You know, they always say that the smartest manager hires people smarter than themselves, but it seems to me that people are always intimidated by someone who might be well-versed.
So you know, like you talk about that, John, and you describe that. So obviously, when you kind of came out of it, so you went to Puma. Tell us a little bit about your journey into Puma and what the motivation was behind that.
Okay, so I wasn't able to get a full work visa in Switzerland at ISL, so I had to leave the country. It's one of the most difficult countries to get a work visa, and I was a young guy. So I came home, and I landed in Boston, and I needed a job, and I started pounding on doors. But one of the things I decided early on is that I needed to do something that I enjoyed. I couldn't see myself, you know, working in an office, doing something, making sales calls, or something that I just didn't have a passion for, and that was soccer.
Right.
So I discovered that Puma North America had an office just outside of Boston, and I had someone put me in touch with the chairman there, and I convinced him that they needed to ramp up their soccer program. And It was a very interesting time because many might not know this, but there were a few federations at the time that were with Adidas, and Adidas required all those contracts that not only did the team obviously have to wear the Adidas apparel, but they required all the players to wear Adidas shoes.
Right.
And we felt that was against labor laws, and it was basically communism. You know, it didn't matter. So you know, a lot of these players were not full professionals in the U.S. national team. And in those days, you were lucky if you had 1,000 people watching a match. This is in the 80s. So we decided we were going to take on the federation, and we signed 7 of the starting 11 players. And they showed up in Puma boots, and they were immediately suspended. And this got traction. There wasn't the social media presence that there is now, but it hit the newspapers, and the general public and the players were extremely supportive of what Puma was trying to do, because what we were saying was, well, wait a minute, you're denying these boys, these players, to be able to make an income because Puma was going to pay them to wear our shoes. Now, it certainly wasn't the contract that a lot of the players are getting today, but you were getting maybe $500 to play for the U.S. national team, and then that was it. Whereas we were offering them $10,000 a year, and if they were able to wear the shoes, if it was ruled that we would give them significantly more money, so that they could actually live on their Puma contract. And it wasn't just wearing the shoes. We sent the players out to a lot of soccer-only stores. Those have dried up, but they were mom-and-pop stores. There was probably 10 to 15 across the
Was it like these superstores we see now?
No.
If you're in London or New York, you've got Nike Down and things like that.
Yeah. In those days, you could not find soccer shoes. You might have had a friend in Europe who could send them, and you're lucky if they got there. They were very expensive. But I think people who had a great love for the game discovered that, hey, I can make some money selling the Puma King or the Adidas Copa. And there were 15 well-known shops. And from that, it's really interesting because that's a whole different story. When the internet came, some friends of mine started a company, and it just blew up because now you could see things online and you could get, shoes from every major category and major brand, Lotto, Diadora, and they made millions, and it kind of put those smaller stores out of business. But going back to Puma, we made a lot of noise and sort of brought soccer out of the basement. And now there was a war. They talked about the Nike Reebok war. Well, there was a soccer war. It was Puma versus Adidas here in the 80s and early 90s. And it was a very interesting time because we were a subsidiary, but the Germans didn't understand the market over here.
Right.
And that happened often because Nick, growing up, you probably wore the six-stud screw-ins, right?
I did, yeah. That's what I wore, yeah.
And I'm sure most of your fans in the UK, that's what they wore and probably still wore. That was unheard of here, and so I had to change the mindset of the Germans to say, look, stop sending us these six-studs. No one uses them, or if they do use them, it's the second pair of boots that's in your bag you take out when it's raining, because most of the US during the summer, during the season, is hard. So they wanted something a little softer. And you saw the whole category evolve, and Puma was a big part of it. Adidas came up with some shoes that were for AstroTurf, something that in Europe no one ever played on. But that was big.
It's so funny because, John, when I came across to the States in 2000, and I was playing in this league, and I was just about to go and train before I was going to obviously go towards the MLS, and one of the things I noticed the ground, I was like, I can't wear these boots, like I was getting blisters because and it was brutal because it was the heat as well. I wasn't used to the heat, and the ground was dry. It was hard as ice, like literally.
Well, if you wore a pair of not six studs but multi studs that were made by Adidas and in Germany or what have you, let's say a Copa America, if you wore that on an artificial turf in the summer, the studs would melt because the AstroTurf kept heat. So here is a company that was culturally disconnected from one of the biggest markets. And that's what I want your listeners to know. The U.S. is the largest soccer market in the world. They think China, yes, there's more people in China, but there's not the buying power there is in the United States.
That's
so,
interesting.
They say there's over 50 million people involved in the sport of soccer in this country in some manner, shape, or form. They might just be, a mom taking their son or daughter, but they're going to buy a jersey, aren't they? If it's not the New York Red Bull, then it's going to be Manchester United or Real Madrid. And that's another thing that, is quite amazing. The world has shrunk because of the internet. When I first started going to Europe, everybody, you could tell a European and you could tell a Yank right away. We wore our Nikes. They wouldn't wear shorts over there. Well, you go to Paris now, and they have LeBron James or Michael Jordan jerseys. And you go to a suburb here in Wellesley, Massachusetts, outside of Boston, all the kids are wearing Messi jerseys, or maybe not so many Ryan Giggs now, but their favorite player at Man United, Paul Pogba. So it shrunk, and it's a huge commercial opportunity. I think that Nike really has pushed Adidas to understand it. They're a European-based company. That's their mentality. Nike is an American-based company. They didn't get it at first, and now they do. And I think, moving along to probably the next topic, where when I went to Reebok, Nike had been in soccer for.
A question I have before you just mention that, because just before I forget, because obviously one of the things I noticed, like when I was watching the Last Dance with Michael Jordan, it was very, very, even though it's off topic, but basically Michael Jordan had a battle if he was going to go to Adidas, and like you were saying, Adidas had a very much a European kind of mentality in an American market. Because if you look at Germany's typically a socialist country, and you're coming into a market in the US where it's predominantly capitalist. So it's a very different culture, isn't it? If you think of like the soccer market. And so whenever you were going, then of course you look with like Reebok. Who would you say out of all of these companies was leading the way? Because I know Puma, they were always big. They, especially in I know in Northern Ireland they were very popular, and in Ireland they were super popular. High Tech were definitely popular. Some of these other brands. I mean, when you look at all of these brands, who was really leading the market, and why do you think a lot of these brands have now been phased out, John? Why do they no longer? Why can't they coexist?
Well, in a way, it's fashion, isn't it? Levi's were the jeans of the 60s, 70s, and maybe part of the 80s, right?
The 90s, I would say as well, yeah. The 90s.
Okay,
yeah.
So look, I have some stepchildren. I remember when they were in high school, I'd say, what are you doing spending $85 on a pair of, what's that brand? American Eagle or whatever the brand was. Levi's. They wanted to gag. But now, look what's hot again. The kids are wearing Levi's again. Things have cycles. I think sometimes it's the person who has the first. And then, of course, when you have a player like Michael Jordan, I mean, I think there's a saying, I want to be like Mike. It's not a Nike saying, but I think it's another brand that he endorsed, and that's true. I mean, they hit it on the nail. I want to be like Mike. And it's the same as a kid growing up here in the suburbs. They want to be Messi if they're a soccer player, or they want to be LeBron, And I think it transcends culture nowadays. So technology is another thing. Nike came out with Air. Imagine that. Most people probably don't know this, but Nike had Air in their shoes for years. It wasn't until they made the visible window in the shoe that you could actually see the air capsule that it took off. So some things are gimmicks, some things are technology, and then I think fashion has a lot to do with it. I mean, who would wear a colored boot back in the 70s or 80s?
No one.
Nobody. And so,
no.
I'll segue to Reebok because the color is an important element in what we did. But Puma went through its run and decided that they were going to get out of the sport. So I needed a job. And luckily, probably 30 minutes away was Reebok, the world headquarters. And again, I knocked on the door, and I had a meeting with a guy who was from the UK, whose role was more of tennis and running. And he said, well, we know that we have to be in the sport if we want to be a global brand. And he said, I'm pulling that we can do it. So long and the short of it was I was brought in, and there was nothing, Nick. There wasn't a shoe. There wasn't a uniform. We didn't have any teams. We didn't have any sales force. So it was left up to me. And luckily, I found a guy in design who was doing running. Someone said he liked the sport of soccer. I pulled him out, and we went to lunch, and on a napkin, we sort of wrote the strategy. I know what they teach you in Harvard Business School, but what they really should give you is start your business in the garage. Bill Gates, right? Start your business on a napkin. You know, how many people have done that? How many songs have been written on a napkin? And that's where it started. And what we said is that we had to be authentic and legitimate day one, because Reebok was known as an aerobic brand. And in fact,
it was.
I heard,
I remember it.
a leisure brand. So, and when word got out that we were going to get into football or soccer, because we're going to plan to do it on a global basis, somebody actually said to me, "What are you going to do? Take an aerobic shoe and put studs on it? Ha ha ha!" So we knew that we had to come out of the blocks as authentic.
Yeah, that's pretty hard to come back from, John. When some
Well,
that's funny. I gotta say, yeah.
They were. That's as true as can be. So we knew that if we were going to do something, we had to do it as good as Adidas or Puma, and that was our role, to produce a shoe that was as good as the Copa Mundial. Mitre had been in the business for many years. Lotto was hot, Diodora, but it didn't have the aura that the Copa or the King did. So that was our thing. So I got on an airplane with a developer, and we literally had a map in those days, and we marked off who made soccer shoes, because made in Europe at that time was important. Made in China for a soccer shoe wasn't. It wasn't,
because being made in China just wouldn't have been. You don't think it would have been embraced?
No. And we weren't set up as a company to develop there. Reebok, a huge company, had expats there. You know, maybe to make one shoe, there's 10 people that are employed by Reebok to get that shoe made. So here we are. I'm the category manager with a developer who happened to be from England, Andy Tate, good guy, and he was on board this project. And we went to so many factories, and the last day we were about ready to pack it in. And the important thing is, before we went to all these factories, we had sent a fax, and the drawings, the design of the shoes are flat, Nick.
Right.
And what happens is the factory interprets that drawing and then puts it over a last. And this is very important. A last is what you crave to be exact. Adidas Copa and the Puma King were what were considered the perfect last. So we went to 3 or 4 factories, 2 in Italy, 1 in France, and they just didn't do anything. They looked like Mitre or low-end shoes. So we walked into this room in a factory outside of Milan, and it was like the light shining down. There was a boot, 90% done into perfection. Right. And we picked it up and we looked at each other and we said, "This is it." And that was the Reebok Integrity, made of kangaroo. It was going to retail for about 110 US. And of course, we had to do it in the 6 stud as well, because that's what Europe demanded. And that was our goal. We had to, an American product category had to convince European market that this was product that was good enough to sell, to elevate the brand. And so we got into soccer because we knew that if you wanted to be a global sports brand, you had to have football as your lead into it, so that people would buy Reebok running shoes or Reebok tennis shoes. And we had a run of over 10 years where not only did we have great product, but you know, the teams we had, Liverpool, Aston Villa, we had Bolton Wanderers, you know, we had the Reebok Stadium, which I was a part of. And we went on from there to have some of the best teams in the world: Atletico Madrid, Fiorentina, IFK Gothenburg. And then we had national teams. We had every single team in South America, except for Brazil. And then going up into the 1994, that was our coming out party. And our goal was to be at least the number 2 brand in the World Cup of '94. And we accomplished that. If it wasn't for Germany, who were required to wear Adidas. And we had signed.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So if you go back to any pictures, and I know for some of your listeners this is ages ago, but if you pick up pictures from the '94 World Cup, I think it's like 3 out of every player was wearing Reebok in every team.
Because you know what I do remember about Reebok, because I remember the classics, people wore those a lot. But in terms of the football, like a lot of footballers, they would like to wear those with like a tracksuit, especially if they were wearing like Reebok. And I know when you saw the Reebok apparel, it looked really, really smart, to be honest.
I'll give credit to my British colleagues because they did an amazing job. They took a great athlete. He was never going to the World Cup, but yet he sold a lot of trainers for Reebok and a lot of what I call tracksuits. I don't know what they call them in the UK, but they made him into a fashion icon, not just a soccer icon.
Right.
And I don't know
so
if anyone...
was there a very clear strategy for Ryan Giggs and what you guys wanted him to do? Because obviously you were in meetings with Ryan, so you would have been really communicating that message to Ryan.
Yes, and I'll give credit to our UK office. We didn't always agree on things, but what they did have a good handle on was take a footballer and put them into everyday streetwear, and people will buy that and want to be like Ryan Giggs. Be like Mike, be like Ryan. And it was tremendously successful.
John, if anybody's trying to reach out to you, where can they get a hold of you?
Well, I'm a couple hours from Boston. My email is jemc3@yahoo.com. I'm happy to give anyone some career advice.
Okay, can they reach out to you via? Do you use any social? Do you use LinkedIn?
I do. I am on LinkedIn.
Okay.
John McCluskey.
Okay.
Santa Barbara Soccer. Our website now is down right now, but if you write me on LinkedIn, I'm more than happy to connect and give you advice. I have people from all over the world. A lot of young people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know in terms of definitely a lot of young players I know that won't make it in the game. This is going to be one of the directions they'll go. So will definitely be great for them to be able to reach out to you, John. John, thank you so much for being on the episode today. Great learning curve. Anybody wants to leave any comment, just don't forget to leave them in the section below. And don't forget to tap the button for the notification squad. And we will speak soon. Thanks very much, everybody.